I'm joined once again by criminal defence attorney and former prosecutor Ambrosio Rodriguez, as well as therapist Dr. Paul Hokemeyer, a specialist in child trauma. Thank you both for being with us. Ambrosio, first to you, we've had more than 20 former footballers who have come forward over the past couple of days making very similar allegations. This seems to be just at the very beginning of this scandal. Would you expect more people to be coming forward?
Oh, absolutely. In cases like this, what happens over time as people have been courageous enough to come forward, it gives other victims the courage to tell their story as well. We've seen that over and over in very well-publicized cases like Penn State or Bill Cosby, and you have that happening here again.
And Paul, these are grown men. Still, how difficult is it for someone to come forward, make these kind of allegations? I guess especially in the early stages of something like this. What are they going through right now?
What they're going through is a re-traumatization. So what they're doing is extraordinarily difficult. When you think about initially what happened to them, they put their trust and their faith into someone who was supposed to protect them, who was supposed to lead them, who was supposed to be a guiding light in their lives. This person betrayed them in a very severe way. So now going back and bringing all of this up is re-traumatizing for them and is extraordinarily difficult and painful.
Are they reliving everything that they sort of had tried to forget in their youth right now?
Well, they certainly brings it up. And so what happens when somebody experiences sexual abuse, they're traumatized and they experience PTSD. So anytime something similar happens, anytime that comes into their awareness or consciousness, their body has a physical reaction to it, and it puts them into a stress mode. So it's very difficult for them socially, it's very difficult for them emotionally, and it's very painful for them physically.
Ambrosio, as a prosecutor trying to gather evidence dealing with a victim of this kind of crime, first of all, how difficult is it actually to build a case, and how conscious do you have to be of what the victim's already been through?
Well, let me just talk about what evidence is and isn't in cases like this.
Yeah.
A lot of people think of evidence as what they see on TV, DNA, fingerprints, kind of biological evidence. You're not going to have that type of evidence in cases like this. What you have are victims coming forward and telling their story. In that pattern of one victim after the other, telling similar stories, that's what the evidence is. And the jury relies on the words that come out of these men's mouth in order to make the determination as to whether or not there's enough evidence to convict them. These types of cases are difficult to put together simply because what these men have to kind of go through in order to prepare them for trial. But they're almost always successful just because of the volume of victims that come forward. Look, I've had cases like this as a prosecutor where you have someone in their 30s or 40s talking about something that happened to them as children, as little girls, and they are stoic in their voices, but their face changes. I've seen the tears. It's heartbreaking, and you don't need DNA evidence or anything like that. You have their words, and it's very powerful.
You can see how real it all is. Right now, the head of the FA in England is saying he doesn't know if there was a cover-up, but there was a cover-up in cases like Penn State. There was a cover-up for Jimmy Savile with the BBC. There was a cover-up in the Catholic Church. How do people in positions of authority actually rationalize covering up these kinds of crimes?
You have to take a look at the way that we're built psychologically. And so when we have a piece of information that threatens us, that makes us feel unsafe, that challenges our world, we get what's called defend it. So we deny it, we rationalize it, we pretend that it doesn't exist. And so there's an extraordinary amount of that going on in these particular cases. And there's, particularly men on men sex, there's still an extraordinary amount of shame and stigma attached to it. So not only do you have the abuse, but now you have the extra cultural layer of it being men on men sex, which is still quite shameful.
And Roger, for those who do cover up these crimes, just in general sense, I guess in the United States, from your point of view, are the penalties stiff enough? Are they enough of a deterrent?
Well, in California, they're very stiff. I mean, most sex crimes in California involving children either involve multiple years in prison, in state prison, or life sentences. So California and most of the United States have very, very stiff sentences, with the idea that, this started happening back in the 80s and through the 90s. The idea is once you commit this, you are taken out of the general population. And even if you eventually do get out of prison, you have to register as a sex offender for the rest of your life. So, and these are what they're called strike offenses. If you get enough of them, it's, again, life in prison.
So is there rehabilitation for the offenders, and is there rehabilitation for those who have been abused?
Absolutely. There's rehabilitation. Let's first start with the ones who have been abused.
Yeah.
These are the people who have the extraordinary courage first to come forward and say that this happened to them, and then they need to put themselves into the care of someone who they trust and who can handle their extraordinary vulnerability. It takes time. It takes a lot of hard work, but there is extraordinary recovery that does happen. In terms of the perpetrators, there is recovery that does happen there too. It's different in the sense of that it needs to be monitored very closely, it needs to be very rigid, and it needs to have a very long tail on it, a long term to it.
Okay, and of course we're just at the beginning of another scandal involving children and sexual abuse. This one, of course, happening in the UK. Ambrosio and Doctor, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Paul
Thank you.
Hokemeyer.
Thank you.